as we talk about the future of Canada in 2026, obviously there's a lot of talk about the need to get Canada moving again, and that includes retaining and strengthening our sovereignty. Well, what does tax policy have to do with our sovereignty as a nation? And more to the point, we desperately need a tax reset. So, here today to talk about that need for a tax reset in this country is, of course, our friend Kim Moody. He's a well known accountant and wealth manager, and we're glad that you could join us again, Kim Moody.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks a lot, David.
So, we've really got to watch these numbers and ask, is this intentionally understating the size of the deficit? So, that's a real
Completely.
concern. Because as we talk about tax policy, Kim, we've had numerous conversations about it. There's some timeless principles that make for good tax policy, and that's going to guide our conversation today. Things like, accountability, transparency,
Yeah.
efficiency, convenience, as Adam Smith talked about so many years
hmm
ago from Scotland.
Yes.
But the whole point is that we need a great tax system. And so I'm going to ask you again a basic question. Why does good tax policy matter to Canadians, let alone this country?
Well, I could speak forever about that, but the short answer is that good tax policy, uh, and tax policy in general, whether it's good or bad or indifferent, it weaves its way into everyday life, right? How
Hmm.
much we pay at the grocery store, how much we pay for utilities, how much we pay for, what we call basic necessities, how we can get a job, how much we're wealth building, can we afford a house? The list goes
Hmm.
on and on and on and on. All of that intersects with good tax policy. As a youngster, taking my undergrad, which is a lot of years ago already, David, but it means I'm getting old. But, I didn't appreciate that. I didn't
Hmm.
appreciate how important good tax policy is to the running of a country.
Hmm.
And it's only when I was in practice and then got fascinated about how tax drives behavior. I could see it. When
Hmm.
you see these high tax rates, in the 1990s, and doctors are leaving like crazy. There's so-called brain drain in the 1990s.
Yeah.
And then there was a reversal of some of that, with Chrétien and, looking at it straight and saying, oh, we got to deal with this. And so,
Hmm.
so there was some, Paul Martin did some policy reversals to try to stem some of that. That's when the light bulb kind of went on saying, holy cow, that really does make a difference. And
Hmm.
so, my premise to your point is good tax policy drives behavior, and it can drive good behavior, bad behavior. In some cases,
Hmm.
it's indifferent. But ultimately, as a country, doesn't it make sense to have good tax policy to drive desired behavior for good results overall?
Right
Yes, and
on.
that's why I've been
Yeah.
advocating for a tax reform reset for it's probably going on 20 some years now that I've been doing this. And it's not just me, there's lots of people. So
Hmm. But bravo on you for being one of those voices that's speaking up for good tax policy. I mean, obviously at Frontier, we're part of the same team as advocating for that better tax policy because it's foundational not only to our personal lives and our families, but the future wealth and prosperity of our country. And therein lies the foundation for what we refer to with concern is sovereignty, right? We won't have sovereignty if we don't have a healthy, vibrant economy that rewards people to do what again? Oh, yeah, work, innovate,
yeah,
to be entrepreneurs. Isn't that it?
yeah, absolutely it is. There's as I say to my kids who are now young adults, hopefully at some point I've taught you, and you can see it clearly, not just through Dad's words,
Hmm.
but through your own behaviors, that hard work makes a difference. It
Yeah.
creates, grit. Oh, I failed, but I got back up. I failed, I got back up. Oh, and
Hmm.
I'm better for it. And as a country, it's the same thing. If we try something and fail, well, at least
Hmm.
we've learned from that and move on. But what we've seen, certainly in tax policy and certainly within the last 11 years, has been just unbelievably damaging ideology permeating tax
Hmm.
policy as opposed to good, solid basic economics, and we really do need to get back to that.
Okay, so on that note, then, I'm asking you this because you're one of the leaders in the accounting field. I mean, you've been in the profession for some time. You see these things not only in terms of the detail, but strategically. Is it fair to say that Canada needs, pardon me, I'm getting rid of the tail end of a cold here. But is it fair to say, Kim, that Canada needs a major, not just tinkering on the edges, not just tinkering, but a major transformative change when it comes to tax policy, or otherwise we will continue to stagnate as an economy?
Yeah, I'll give you a bit of a longer answer on this because I think the history of this is important to understand the reasons why I'm advocating it. And so the last time Canada had major comprehensive tax reform or tax study was in
Mm-hmm.
1962 when then John Diefenbaker or PM John Diefenbaker convened, the Royal Commission on Taxation. The reasons why he did it are actually kind of interesting. I won't waste time on that today, but um, but he got voted out of office in 1963, I believe it was,
Mm-hmm.
and so it was then new Prime Minister Lester Pearson that picked up the mantle. And ultimately, the report by the commission was released in 1962. Very controversial,
Mm-hmm.
and ultimately debated hard. And in 1969, then Finance Minister Benson came out with a rebuttal, which basically rejected some of the core recommendations, such as full taxation of capital gains, which have been recommended, but rejected it and came to a compromise on that and a number of other issues and implemented major tax reform in 1972. We've had some significant reforms since then, like Michael Wilson's 1985, 1986, and 87 budgets, which
Mm-hmm.
made some significant reforms. We had GST in 1991. We had the Mintz
Mm-hmm.
report on business taxation in 1999, which resulted in some changes in the early 2000s. But fast forward, and then we had the private corporation tax battle in 2017. But ultimately, since 1972, there has not been this really good, solid look as to what's going on. And instead, we have this patchwork quilt. The statute, the Income Tax Act, is about that thick now and almost incomprehensible, even to seasoned practitioners like me. And yes, AI is going to make it easier, no question about it, but
Mm-hmm.
does it take away the wisdom and the judgment? No. And so, why do we need this reform? We need it because of the reasons we talked about, which
Mm-hmm.
is it's been a long time since we've had a good look at what we need. And it's not tinkering that we need, which we have lots and lots of tinkering. And when I talk to
Mm-hmm.
some of my very smart, academic like colleagues, they just want precision changes, and if we just make this change, then that will be better. If we do this and this and this and this,
Mm-hmm.
and there's usually a list of things. No, I sat in a conference in Calgary, listened to a tax reform. I was eagerly anticipating going to this particular session on tax reform put on by some very strong tax people, but it was a list of surgical fixes. We don't need
Mm-hmm.
surgical fixes. We need what Jack Mintz calls big bang tax reform, big bang business reform, and modeled after Estonia, for example, which he does a
Mm-hmm.
lot of advocation on that. I'd be happy to talk about it if you'd like. And he advocates for big bang personal reform. And I'm a big disciple of Jack Mintz's thoughts on these because that's exactly what we need. You know, Pierre Poilievre has picked up some of those ideas, not all of them, obviously, and we
Mm-hmm.
need somebody to pick those ideas up. I don't care if it's Carney, I don't care if it's Poilievre. Bottom line is we need a shakeup. And anytime I talk to my colleagues on these big bang ideas, it's like, or some of my colleagues, especially the academically inclined, it's, oh no, you can't do that because of X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine the problems if you did what you're saying, Kim? It would be, all this and this and this and this. And you know what? I get frustrated with that. And the reason I do, David, is because, can you imagine what the naysayers were like when we formed Canada in
Mm-hmm.
1867? There is no shortage of naysayers. But Sir John A. MacDonald and his other colleagues said, you know what?
Hmm.
We're not going to listen to that noise. We're going to move forward in what we think the best thing is for our new and burgeoning, new country. And wow, that fast forward to today, over 100 and what is it, 50 years later, that kind of forethought is what we need in tax now. We can, in my view, forget the surgical fixes, ignore the naysayers. And yes, they're very, very smart people, but let's think about what it could be. And that is the kind of thinking that our country needs, in my view.
Well, right on. I like the way you think, Kim Moody. We need to shed the tinkering. We need to get on with major transformative change with our tax policy because really everything's at stake. I mean, I want to go through the state of the nation here a little bit
Sure.
because that is the thoughtful basis in which we can see reality and look at policy solutions to move our country forward. We all agree that our country should be, well, the most prosperous free nation on the planet. But right now, we've got a lot of problems. We all know
Yeah.
about Canada's stagnating economy, where we're growing like 1%, as our neighbor, the United States, grows by like 24%. So we've got a lot of problems. So I want to show some slides here because they're kind of symptoms of the larger story that is Canada right now, where we've got a productivity problem, lower standards of living, we've got an entrepreneurial class leaving, and we've even got a lot of money leaving, and we've got system questions as well. So we've got a big agenda today. So let's talk about some graphs here. I want to bring up the first one that talks about business research and development as a percentage of GDP, or our gross domestic product. This is really quite amazing. It's from an organization called the OECD. It's an organization of developed countries, and they have this research unit. And there you go. You've got Israel at a whopping 6% in 2024 investing in R&D. And that's really creating a bright path of economic development and opportunity. And meanwhile, Canada is that little red rectangle far below the OECD average. And we're coming in just a little bit above 1%. It's pretty modest. It's very low. So what's the significance of this graph, Kim, from your perspective?
Well, there's a couple things. One, with respect to the graph, it's obvious that Canada doesn't take R&D as serious as a country as other countries. You look at Israel and Korea, tiny countries, well, especially Israel's tiny, tiny,
Mm-hmm.
both geographically and population-wise. But we probably use software daily that comes from Israel,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I do. And it's amazing to me that a small country like that can outperform because they take that kind of stuff seriously. They're not a resource rich
Mm-hmm.
country like Canada is, but they reinvent themselves in other ways and provide economic success for its citizens and residents. Canada, the second thought is, and it's not evident from this graph, but it's just my experience, is a lot of the R&D benefits that Canada invests in is through the tax system, through tax
Mm-hmm.
credits. And
Mm-hmm.
I have long advocated saying I'm not convinced that that's the way to do it. Our tax system is very, very complex as it is. The administration is complex. Why are we using the tax system to generate tax credits, which then have to be administered and reviewed? And
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to use this graph and example, and I don't know the answer to this, David, but what does Israel do? Do they administer the tax system, or is it other kind of rebates or government
Mm-hmm.
investment? What is it? And then same with Korea and Japan and U.S. I've
Mm-hmm.
got some familiarity with the U.S., but the long story short is there's lots to learn from this.
Well, absolutely. So this is foundational to our future prosperity. If you're not innovating as a business, you're going backward. And so this shows, this is a serious flag here. If we bring up a next slide here, it talks a lot about the whole issue of if we just bring up this slide here, is it talks about Canadian investment abroad versus foreign investment in Canada. And as you can see, we have an awful lot of money, and it's speeding up. Really, is the amount that is going and investing abroad. And so what's going on here as Canadian pension holders invest their money not in Canada but in other countries? Is that what's going on here, Kim?
Well, certainly that's a good chunk of it, yes. But I think the main story that comes out of this kind of graph, which I'm seeing day to day in practice, is that Canada as a country is not an attractive place to plant your garden. I call it
Hmm.
the economic garden, like a lot of economists say. And if you think of our country as the actual garden, are you planting seeds in the country, or do you have economic gardens outside of the country? And what this graph tells me is it's outside of the country because the gardens are not growing that well. They're not being
Hmm.
fertilized, they're not being watered, they're weed laden. And frankly, that's the analogy that I often say is, we've got a garden that's not being gardened that well by
Hmm.
good gardeners. And we'll just plant our seeds in other good gardens. And so that is a train wreck. And we're seeing the results of that. And it's been long coming. Like, look at, the widening gap started roughly around 2015. Is there any coincidence there? I don't think so,
Hmm.
right? That's when the Liberal government came to power. There were some
Right.
little few challenges that we had, but we were pretty much, you know, neck and neck for a lot of years. But it's really gotten bad in the last while, so it's terrible stuff.
So if we were to change that graph, how would we do it from tax policy point of view? Is there an easy answer to that, Kim?
Well, no, there's not an easy answer, but it does start with number one, a commitment to tax reform. Now, politically, that's challenging, and I've written about this, and I think you and I are talking about this at some point as well, is that can you
Hmm.
just do another Royal Commission on taxation, like a 4-year study period?
Hmm.
I don't think the political environment is available today, especially with instant gratification. You want instant results, social media. I
Hmm.
mean, the time attention of most politicians is not there. So we're going to have a system that does reform in a powerful way, but in a short period of time. And
Hmm.
and so that's the first thing. The second thing is you need, and this is the easy stuff, but you need to bring down personal tax rates, and you got to find a way to pay for it, which in my view is government expenditure reduction,
Hmm.
and a way to build that economic garden in a way that can recover those lost government revenues by reducing those rates. When you have high personal tax rates in Ontario, actually pretty much every single province in Canada outside of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and the territories have high personal tax rates that exceed 50%. That's ridiculous.
Right.
Where's the incentive to grow your income
Hmm.
and work harder when you know that you're going to take home less than 50 cents on the dollar?
Hmm.
And the report on the Royal Commission on Taxation talked about that. Actually, in 1966, they said we believe that personal tax rates should not exceed 50% because there's a psychological effect.
Hmm.
And I think those words are negative effect. And I think those words are just as apropos today as they were in 1966. We need to find a way to get those tax rates down. We need to find a way to attract foreign investment into Canada. We're a tiny country. And as
Hmm.
much as the media and a lot of people like to think that we're really important worldwide, we're not. We have to
Hmm.
find ways to punch above our weight and attract that foreign capital and make it grow, make that economic garden grow. And from a tax policy perspective, is there ways to do that? Yes. One of the things that Pierre Poilievre has ripped off from Jack Mintz in a limited way, and I guess me too, because I've been a big supporter of this idea, is what Estonia does. Estonia doesn't have a corporate tax; they have a corporate distribution tax. So if you reinvest all of your profits in year one back in the Estonia company, no tax. But if you distribute it outside, either directly or indirectly, that's when there's a corporate distribution tax. Why not do something like that in Canada?
Hmm.
I think that would be fantastic. So anyhow, we could go on and on, David.
Okay. But to be clear, this is an urgent matter as the bleeding of capital is significant. Oh, like money is leaving, capital is leaving this country. and going
Yes.
elsewhere. It's not staying in
Yes.
Canada because
No.
this is essentially a hostile business climate. Now, there's some exceptions. Um, I look at Alberta and Saskatchewan, but by and large, you have jurisdictions that just based on their tax policy really don't want business. Is that a fair comment, Kim?
Yeah. Look at Manitoba. High corporate tax, except for small business. But and Manitoba's just one example. Ontario is probably the worst. You
Right.
have 54% personal tax rates. You
Hmm.
have a very jumbled corporate tax system provincially. And
Hmm.
so the short answer is yes.
Right.
Alberta by
Well,
far is the
you
best.
cite Kim Manitoba. It's a very good example because Manitoba has a long history of entrepreneurship and successful business, but you also have a significant outflow of businesses that have left the region because of
Yeah.
high business taxes. I mean, people who run
Yes.
businesses are human beings with families, so they make rational decisions based on where you can pay less tax. And I think this is part of the story of why you have such a large concentration of corporate headquarters now in Alberta, because those
Yeah.
people, the people that run them, don't want to pay excessive personal business taxes. Is
Yeah.
that how you view it as well?
Oh, completely. As much as tax doesn't drive the investment dog, it matters, right? I
Yeah.
mean, it's part of the equation.
Hmm.
And it's the same thing with individuals, right? And you know, do people move to the United States as an example to get rid of high tax rates? Sure, they do. But
Hmm.
usually that's not at the top of the list. There's other reasons. But I'll tell you, if tax can add to that reason, then it's definitely in many cases the straw that breaks the camel's back, and we're seeing
Absolutely.
a lot of that. We're seeing a lot of that.
So I do want to just pick up that thread as well, because the last time we spoke some 4.5 months ago, we talked about the record number of Canadians leaving the country, including the entrepreneurial class. And so you talked about the kind of files you deal with, and I know this
Yeah.
is an anecdotal information, but we know the larger stats support it. So is that speeding up the departure of entrepreneurs from your perspective, or is it decreasing or leveling off?
Well, no, it's increasing for sure. I mean, uh, I mentioned, and just in case your listeners didn't, catch our last conversation, I'll just repeat myself here for a little bit and then bring
Hmm.
it back to current date here. But in the first 23 years of my career, I worked on maybe a dozen departure tax files, as we call them, which is, when you leave Canada, become a non-resident Canada, you're deemed to have disposed of all of your assets at fair market value. There's some exceptions to those rules, but whatever the ultimate resulting tax, we affectionately call that departure tax.
Hmm.
And roughly a dozen files, and most of them involved grandma and grandpa who were retiring and just wanted to be in a warmer spot. So it was lifestyle, snowbird kind of thing. That was by
Hmm.
far of those dozen files in my first 23 years of my career. Fast forward to 2015, and we had the new government, and we had an immediate 4% tax rate increase on the personal tax for 2016, and then we had the private corporate tax battle, and then we had all the
Hmm.
spending during COVID and the threats of a wealth tax, and then we had just poor tax policy, and then we had Carney elected, first of all appointed and then elected, and it's like hands up, like, oh my God, that's it, I'm out of here. It is the straw that breaks the camel's back. So
Hmm.
you know, we've had well over 1,000 files since the last time I talked to you. Think about that: 12 files, roughly 1,000, and the wealth attached to that.
Hmm.
People leaving is into the tens of billions of dollars. That's a
Remarkable.
significant amount of money for a small office like ours. We're about 80 people across Canada.
Hmm.
But you take any firm that ultimately deals with private clients, which there's not a lot of firms that do, but at a
Hmm.
specialist level like we do. But the bottom line is it's very similar reports. Today, the update from 4.5 months ago when we talked roughly is I'm seeing probably just me about three new files a week on departing, which is significant. And that doesn't include my colleagues in my office. So just guesstimating here,
Hmm.
since you and I last chatted, we probably have another 100 files of
Remarkable.
significant wealth, and one
Hmm.
of them is yeah, it is billions of dollars, and it's significant stuff. So
Hmm.
it's a shame, and it's not something I'm proud of
Hmm.
as a proud Canadian.
Hmm.
I wore my red coat not to show my politics, but just to show
Okay.
my country pride.
Right. Good for you.
But
But just
so
to be
there you go.
clear here, why does this matter? Like if somebody who's well off, an entrepreneur, leaves Canada, why should Canadians care about that? I mean, people can, money is mobile, but in this case, so what? We've got lots of people coming into this country who are immigrants, ones that are temporary visa holders, in the millions, to people that are still coming in almost record numbers. So what? We lose some, we gain some. Why does it matter?
Because the people that generally come in can't replace. It takes a lot of people at that average level that come in to replace even one. I wrote about this in a Financial Post piece probably about a year ago. If you take a bill, just as a
Hmm.
simple example, and this is way too simple, but let's say you have a billionaire and all of his assets are GICs. So he's got a GIC worth $1 billion and it generates, let's say, 5%. Well, that's $5 million of if I'm doing my math correct, and I'm an accountant, so I should be able to do this, but 5% is $5 million investment income per year. And, uh, and that'll generate tax of, keep math simple, let's say half, $2.5
Hmm.
million of tax.
Hmm.
So if you have the average Canadian, which the average Canadian earns roughly $50,000 and pays, let's say aggressively $10,000 of that in tax, which it's not 10,000, but let's just say it's aggressive, 10,000. How much of those average Canadians is it going
Hmm.
to take to replace just that one? Well, I can't do math in my head. $2.5 million of tax divided by 10,000. That's a lot of people.
Hmm.
And so, is that 250? Yeah, I think that's 250 off the top of my head. So that's the reason why it matters, is because when you see that level of wealth leave our tax system,
Hmm.
and it doesn't take a lot of wealthy people to leave to replace that. We're seeing that in California right now, by the way. I wrote a
Hmm.
Financial Post piece on that about 3 weeks ago, with the threat of a billionaire's tax. Well, how many billionaires have left California in the last little
Hmm.
while? A lot,
A
right?
lot. Yeah.
And so that's
So money does move downhill like water.
it
And
does.
and so this is kind of common sense. I mean, it's not a new insight, but it's almost like the decision makers who are in charge don't know this. It's like they're
Wow.
behaving like the world is kind of a fantasy, and that tax policy doesn't matter. And so that's why
Yeah.
we see these graphs. And there's a fascinating dynamic here. I want to show you a graph about investment per worker here, because I think it's reflective again of what's going on in this country that is very concerning. So this is a slide regarding real total investment per worker, Kim. We've got 2014, and it's really quite remarkable. You've got the United Kingdom, United States, the European number of European countries here in the OECD average. But the punchline is that the Canadian number is the red line, and it is the lowest of the bunch. It's far below the OECD average. And the United States is just in order of magnitude at least twice our number. So it's really quite remarkable. What does this graph mean to you?
It says a bunch of things, right? That is Canada investing appropriate amounts per worker comparatively? Absolutely not. Is there
Hmm.
good tax and economic reasons why? Yes, because again, it goes back to the basic analogy. Is our economic garden flourishing? No. It's full of
Hmm.
weeds. It's not fertile. And so, we need to turn this around, and good tax policy can certainly contribute to that.
Now, this is what I find remarkable is this is from 2024 as well. So now, as we go into 2026 on January 1, the United States has changed its tax policy considerably to be even more competitive. And
Yeah.
frankly, one of the examples is the amount that you can write off on depreciation on capital for investment in making, say, for example, your manufacturing plant even more efficient with new equipment. So that can be uh, uh, what is it called? Monetized or capitalized in the U.S. tax policy within a year now, the same year. Whereas in Canada, we don't follow that rule at all. It's over a period of years. So this gap will even get larger, not smaller.
Yes. Yeah, I
Is that
agree.
correct?
Oh, absolutely. If we continue not to respond in a thoughtful way and instead just respond, and I think we're going to talk about this later, but with nutty tax policy announcements that come out, like one of the announcements that came out yesterday, we'll talk about this, I'm sure, but was in order to help our food supply system, they're going to allow 100% deduction on greenhouses. Oh, great. Yeah, that'll certainly turn the needle. How many greenhouse operators do we have in Canada? How many new
Mm-hmm.
greenhouses do we have?
Mm-hmm.
Like, come on, that's not material.
Yeah.
It's good media stuff, and
Okay.
it's
So
it's
those
picking and
announcements
choosing.
then are really built on kind of the political optics, how something
Completely
appears rather than does it actually make a difference in the economy and investment and moving the country forward. So I think
right.
that, yeah, I think that's a really good example where this is that's in complete contrast to the urgency of moving that graph forward, because that's the future of wealth and prosperity is being able to encourage business to invest in every worker so that they have a more secure job, a better paying job, and ironically, a job that pays more taxes into the system. This is
Yeah,
the thing
and
that we're doing is we're taxing in many ways the goose that laid the golden egg here. Isn't that it,
well,
it's that simple, isn't it?
abs absolutely. And one thing I didn't mention, I mean, I used the loss of tax revenue in the example of when people leave Canada, but more often than not, a lot of the people that are leaving Canada are entrepreneurs and they're taking jobs
Hmm.
with them. I mean, I could
Exactly.
bore you to tears
Yeah.
on how many files I've worked on, my colleagues have worked on, where we're just shifting operations from Canada to the United States, for example, which is
Right.
by far the biggest repository. And,
Hmm.
the loss of jobs and the loss of tax revenue combined is massive. And
Hmm.
it's sad.
Okay, so this is an urgent situation. So if we look again at some of the principles that should guide a reset for tax policy, one of them would be the efficiency principle, that our tax system should be efficient. And I want to do this in two parts. One is we want to talk about the CRA and there's a lot of good people that work there, but it's been challenged by the Auditor General to do a better job. And I want to talk about automation. So I want to start with the criticisms first. What
Sure.
what are the concerns that the CRA or the tax man needs to do a better job of being efficient and more customer focused? Can you help us
Well,
understand what's going on there, Kim?
sure. I think there's two big issues. It's certainly immediate. I mean, the root causes of this are something that needs to be explored in a big, big way. Like they're call centers. They're call
Hmm.
centers. I don't know if you've tried to call them. I've heard some anecdotal things recently where they're getting better on answering calls. I personally haven't experienced that. I'm still very frustrated whenever I call the CRA.
Hmm.
But assuming some of these anecdotal things are true, then good. We need an improvement. So their call center, their approachability to the average Canadian is just not there. And so that needs dramatic improvement. Now, that's been a constant issue ever since I've been in practice, but it's gotten way worse. So that's the first thing. The second thing is just the quality of their audits. You know, um, Quality of auditors has always been a challenge, especially when you have a behemoth like the CRA. They have an important job to do. They need to administer
They
our
really
tax
do.
system,
Yes.
right? But the quality of the people doing the job and the training is critically important. And that's one of the things the Auditor General criticized them on. Just a quick aside here. I wrote about this and I parroted the Auditor General's comment about this in one of my writings. This is about a month and a half ago. And, the Auditor General said that the average CRA employee gets 30 minutes of training per year, which is obviously should be frightening for most Canadians, right? Because to administer our tax system with 30 minutes of annual update training, that's ridiculous.
Hmm.
And so I wrote about that and criticized it and said that the CRA could be better. And I get an email from the CRA media relations saying, Mr. Moody, your article is incorrect. Uh, there's many CRA employees that have much more than 30 minutes of time, PD time. And so I wrote back, and that's pretty much the entire email. And so I wrote back and I said, I'm puzzled by, number one, why you would write to me, and number two, why you would challenge me when I took this line right out of the Auditor General's report. And three, I understand what average means statistically. I took a number of statistics courses, so I understand what
Hmm.
average means. It means that some take less, some take more, and there's the
Hmm.
average. So, like, that's the kind of silly, pervasive thought when you
Hmm.
have somebody that can write such a foolish email to an
Hmm.
experienced practitioner, to try to defend that statement. Now, if there's some non-truths in the Auditor General report, let's hear them, because I'm all ears.
Hmm.
But the
Right on.
bottom line is we need much improvement.
Well, we need a good CRA, and they've got a tough job, and
They
we
do.
need to support them to do a better job as the Auditor General, and you have spoken up about it. So let's get better callbacks from the call centers, not worse. And we
Better
need to
better
also look
audits.
at how we do good professional training for the team there at CRA. It's not an easy
Yeah.
job. But one of the things that's also intriguing is that you've written recently about the need or the opportunity through automation to improve these very
Yeah.
issues. Are you hopeful in that regard?
This is something that I've been on the bandwagon about for years and years and years. When I found out that countries like the UK and Mexico is another one, would automatically file, low complexity taxpayers' returns
Hmm.
because they had all the
Yes.
information. It's like, okay, let's think about the downsides of that. What are the downsides? I don't see any. Especially if you have, if the government has all the information at their disposal, which they generally do,
Hmm.
um,
Hmm.
and they give the taxpayer the opportunity to review and amend, I don't see any downside. But I can tell you, there's a lot of people that that criticize me on this, um, because um, they ultimately say that that's government overreach,
Hmm.
and so I don't agree with that, especially when it comes to low complexity taxpayers. That's just not right.
Okay,
So
so let's see how that unfolds, that
yeah,
automation. I guess the other side to this is the principle, when you think of principles of a good tax system, is simplicity. Surely there's
yes,
the opportunity to just make the system way more simple. I mean, I think that we've all seen the larger tax code. I mean, it's like a brick, it's like a doorstop. So we need to make it simpler so it's understandable, so we can feel like it's transparent and accountable. So why wouldn't we just adopt, say, a flat tax? Wouldn't that be a great way
that's
to improve productivity in this country?
well, I think so. Yes, a well-designed flat tax, which is part of Jack Mintz's Big Bang personal tax reform ideas,
Right.
is to have that. One of the criticisms of a flat tax is that it can be very regressive and hurt lower income people, but you can
Hmm.
design around that with minimal complexity. And so, yes, I agree. Now, having said that, the CRA, just to be clear to your listeners, the CRA administers the tax system. It's the Department of Finance and the political branch of the Department of Finance
Yes.
that deploys tax policy. So really, this is a
Right.
Department of Finance issue as opposed to the CRA. But in
Hmm.
my view, David, that is the root cause of why the CRA has, number one, overwhelmed with questions and phone calls. I mean,
Hmm.
when you look at the call volume, yes, I understand that they can't keep up. It's into the millions every day.
Hmm.
Well, maybe not quite millions, but it's a lot. And so you need to work hand in hand with our political masters and the technicians of the Department of Finance to simplify the
Right.
system. But that all comes back to tax reform.
Exactly. So let's be fair to our friends at the CRA. They've got a tough job,
They
and
do.
their bosses need to do a better job simplifying this system because they're wielding a tax code that is so complex. Who at the CRA could even understand the tax code because it's so darn complex? Is that what you're saying, Kim?
The average auditor by far does not understand the tax statute. They
Hmm.
just don't. And most expertise in tax is in the practitioner community at the specialist level.
Wow.
Now, if you could
Well,
take
and
that
and
practitioner experience into the CRA, that'd be
mhm.
better, but realistically, they just can't.
But think of the benefits of simplifying the tax code for every Canadian. The last time I checked, a third of Canadians use or need extra help from you guys, like accountants and specialists, and they spend, what is it, over $30 billion every year. I mean, in many ways, if we didn't have to spend that much money, that would help everybody, wouldn't it?
Completely. I mean, as I said in the article that I published, as a matter of fact, today when we're recording this, David, I put out a Financial Post article on automated tax filing, and I cite those
Hmm.
statistics that you're talking about. The accounting industry is $30 billion. Tax prep is about 27% of that for, let's say, 8 billion.
Hmm.
And of that 8 billion, how much of that does that represent low complexity taxpayers? A material amount. Let's just be aggressive and, or sorry, conservative and
Hmm.
say $1 billion, which in my view is probably higher than that. Should low complexity taxpayers pay $1 billion to comply with their tax
Yeah, it's
affairs?
crazy.
Nutty.
Yeah,
Who,
yeah, it really is.
nobody
Yeah.
benefits. I don't benefit. The country doesn't benefit. It's a
Hmm.
low productivity thing. It's disgusting in my view.
Hmm. Well, in all fairness to Canadians, a lot of people are pretty intimidated, understandably, with a tax system
Absolutely.
that's complicated. Um,
Absolutely.
so I
And it
want to
needs to get
pursue a
better.
little bit. Yeah, exactly. So I do want to pursue a little bit further another principle that should guide a reset of tax policy in this country, and that has to do with transparency. And I want to talk a little bit about this from, I mean, there's so many angles here, but I want to go at it from two angles. The first one has to do with the whole aspect of filing. And the whole point is that wouldn't it be better for our entire tax system, let alone our political system, in terms of accountability, if everybody had to, like the good old days, have to write out a quarterly check to remit their taxes to government? In other words, I'm today everything is kind of, well, behind a black box where things are automatically deducted. Your taxes go straight to the government and you don't even think about it. Has that created a problem where a lot of people don't even understand or have a clue how much tax they really paid? And if they had to do the check every quarter, they would look at this whole issue of tax accountability and where their money's going a lot more closely.
Absolutely, David. It would. Now, realistically, will that happen? No, because government won't let it happen because they like this. They rely on that steady flow, right? But
Hmm.
what's the consequence of that to what you're saying? Well, it's decreased financial literacy, right? And
Hmm.
I mentioned this early on in this recording is that you know most Canadians are financially illiterate, and I'm not saying that to be arrogant or say that I'm
Hmm.
smarter.
But it's
That's a
true.
simple fact. It's a simple
Yeah.
fact. And when you have that, you know, money that's just simply going to the government without great transparency or at least low financial literacy, that does nothing to help understand and make the average Canadian understand. And I've been on this
Hmm.
pulpit for a lot of years. And as a matter of fact, my recent book that I just updated, Making Life Less Taxing, version 2, is about to be published in the next week here. That's
Hmm.
one of the key premises I say in the book is that Canadians, in order to help improve their prosperity, both financially and otherwise, and to make better decisions at the ballot box, need to improve their financial literacy. If Canadians
Right
really
on.
truly understood how poorly our country is run from a fiscal perspective, they wouldn't vote those people in.
Hmm.
And if they do, then they're insane. That's as simple as that. If they
Right
understood it and
on.
continued to vote those people in, they'd quickly realize, uh, well, I'm saying, I'm repeating myself, they're insane. But if they actually had improved financial literacy and understood how important tax policy is,
Hmm.
how it affects their pocketbooks, can improve affordability, the, I think overall life would be a lot better for those people and our country.
Right on. No, I hear you. So I want to move to another part of solutions here when it comes to, well, finance policy, tax policy, and that has to do with how do we get this country going again? We've talked about, well, the concern that our country economically is stagnating. You know, Frontier, we've talked a lot about, say, 12 key policy solutions to move our country forward. You can see them on our website. But the bottom line is pretty important. We promote external trade, we diversify our trade, we lower barriers to internal trade. We still don't have, Kim, internal trade in this country between provinces. It's really remarkable. We need to simplify
So,
the tax code, as we've talked about, simplifying the filing. We really need to get this country going again. Are there other key solutions that we need to employ here to move our country forward?
well, that's a big long list that you had there, and nothing else is
Hmm.
popping in my head.
Hmm.
Um, I'm all ears. Anything that can attract good talent, retain good talent. One of the
Yes.
consequences that I didn't mention, David, about people leaving, family entrepreneurs leaving Canada, is they're taking their youngsters. And those youngsters, in many cases, are not coming back.
Yeah.
That's a shame, because we need those youngsters as a country.
Hmm.
So that's
No, I
probably
hear you.
all I have to add on that.
No, that makes sense. Now, we've also seen some other interesting types of solutions tabled, and we've got into this discussion because sometimes there's things that present themselves as solutions when in fact they sound more political to me than anything else. Your reference earlier about, well, zooping up the deductions for greenhouses is was an example. But the other one that was just announced this week was the Prime Minister announced a package of measures that will, quote, ease affordability for facing families. It all sounds good. I mean, who's against affordability? But this package includes an increase to the GST credit for 5 years and 20 million for local food infrastructure fund to support food banks and other programs that provide food to families. And there's even a special $500 million fund from the quote strategic response fund to help business manage supply chain issues without raising the cost of food. So, what are we talking about here? And is this a good idea, Kim?
Yeah, well, I'll give you the latter answer right up front. This is a terrible idea. It's all politics, and it's all, um, hey, I'm the hero kind of guy. Do you remember the the GST holiday uh, credit? Or it wasn't even a credit. It was just, they brought it down to zero from mid-December of 24 until mid-February of 25.
Oh, yes, right.
You remember that? That was so silly, and rightfully got roundly roasted by even moderates,
Hmm.
and even some left of center rightfully roasted that as just pure politics and poor policy. This is exactly that, brought back in a more well-designed fashion. Instead of bringing it down to zero and making a holiday, let's just
Hmm.
give cash handouts using the existing infrastructure that we have on GST credits. Low income people receive GST credits, and they have ever since
Hmm.
1991. And that is a way to bring down the regressiveness of uh, of a GST to lower income people. And so if you want to, make it look like you're dealing with affordability issues, oh, and politically you want to attack your opposition who's talking about high spending and inflation, which is causing these affordability issues.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, so why don't we just give them handouts? And so we'll just give them some handout cash, and then hope that they remember us when we go to the ballot box. That's what this is about. This is
Okay.
very, very poor policy. Like, can you
Hmm.
imagine? Let's say that the average person gets an extra $500 a year,
Hmm.
um, which is aggressive because the average person won't. But let's just say $500 a year. Is that going to make a material difference on groceries throughout the year?
Hmm.
No, it's not. But is it good politics? Sure. Why not? Anytime you can hand out money and buy votes, perfect. Is it good tax policy? No, it's terrible policy.
Okay.
It's
So
absolutely
if I
terrible.
if I hear what you're saying is that the political process makes it in party's interest to hand out checks literally. So you get a check in the mail. So therefore you'll remember that. But meanwhile, food inflation is a real concern in this country. It's hurting people. You
Completely.
can see it every time you go to the grocery store. So this doesn't really address why that food inflation is happening, namely prolific government spending, regulation, including the carbon tax. I mean, the carbon tax has moved to being not as visible at the kind of the retail level of the economy, but it's still at another level of the economy, namely with producers. So help us understand what's really driving food inflation here, Kim.
Well, I mean, it goes to farmers. It starts with farmers and other, food sources. But, if you look at the basics, where I've acted for farmers for years, and, the average family farm is now being decimated in favor of large, large farms. But having said that and leaving that aside, the input costs that it takes to produce food,
Mm-hmm.
fertilizer, gasoline, diesel, utility
Yeah.
costs, power, it's massive. And do we have industrial carbon taxes added on top of that, those costs? Yes. And they're material. So that's it. I agree with the conservatives on this. It is a material cost. I wholly disagree with Mr. Carney that we need an industrial carbon tax. We don't
Mm-hmm.
need an industrial carbon tax in the least
Mm-hmm.
bit. And all that does is add to the overall cost of our food. So that's number one. Number two is just excessive government spending. When
Mm-hmm.
you have lots of money supply and lots of people chasing these goods, all that does is bring up the cost. Classic definition of inflation. And so those two issues alone are what's happening here. We really do need to, instead of handing out money, which adds to the inflationary cost,
Mm-hmm.
we need to deal with the root causes of what's causing all this.
All right. So let's get rid of the carbon tax. Let's get rid of those
Yes.
regulations. Let's allow people to get their groceries at a good cost, and we'll get affordability also if we stop all this prolific government spending. So that's the key here. So as we look to 2026, you've advised Canadians that we really need to up our game when it comes to financial literacy, and you've really called eloquently for a tax reset, not a minor one or tinkering one, but a major one. So, my question to you is, are we going to get the same results in terms of a stagnated economy if we don't get on with a tax policy reset?
Yeah, I think we will. We will continue to live politically, unfortunately, with the image of a very smart businessman, economist, banker who
Mm-hmm.
knows exactly how to run the economy and deal with all these challenges that the United States is throwing at us. That's such a falsehood. And that's such a ridiculously low IQ way to think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, we need to get to the root causes of what's causing a lot of these issues. We need to make our
Mm-hmm.
economic garden fertile and ultimately, yes, trade diversify, but we're not getting away from the United States anytime soon.
Mm-hmm.
And we really do need to deal with these issues head on. Without tax reform, it'll just simply complicate that job and make it significantly harder. Mr. Carney, in the election campaign of last year, promised an expert review of the corporate tax system.
Mm-hmm.
Did we see that in the 2025 budget? No, because realistically, this government and the government's previous, the liberal government's previous, had zero interest in tax reform, and it's sad because it takes political risk to do it, but the benefits to Canadians are massive, and so in my view, that political risk is worth it. But not in the eyes of this government, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, let's hope that we do get on with tax reform despite the challenges of moving it forward through the political process. But we need tax reform to serve all Canadians. And I want to thank you, Kim Moody, for joining us for this far reaching conversation about tax policy.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Here at Frontier, we don't receive any government funding. We are nonpartisan and we work for you. Find out more and support this important work by visiting fcpp.org today. Thank you so much for watching this recent episode. We love your comments and we'd like to hear more from you. If you haven't, make sure you press this bell and subscribe to this channel. Check everything out. We'd love to hear more about your comments.